We're obviously going to talk about tonight's election results across really in three places, but really across the country, there are elections happening. So we're going to dive into three in depth of those. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be back.
So let's start when I just looked up. Let's go through them quickly. So Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, appears to won by 12, 13, something like that. Last I checked, that's similar to what Democrats won in 2017, the first time Trump ran. It's a lot. I think Harris won by about 6 in 2024. So a big overperformance compared to that. So what do you make of what happened in Virginia? I'll start with Alex.
I think that this was a huge overperformance. In a lot of ways, I think it didn't shock me. I think, the state of Virginia itself is being hit particularly hard by the ongoing government shutdown. It is in a lot of ways the kind of most establishment-friendly state of the moment. I think what we're going to see, I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but I think that people are going to look at Spanberger now as a kind of generational talent because she, is racking up pretty huge numbers there. And I think that she should be praised for that. But, I can feel the gravitational pull of the 2028 takes already. I think that people should remember that Jay Jones, who spent the last, month embroiled in, pretty serious scandal, also significantly overperformed. And I think that sort of points me to my kind of big take from right now, which is just that everywhere you turn, Democratic voters are mad as hell. They're scared about the current administration and they want to show it. But I think that the larger story here being one that benefits, the sort of establishment figures like Abigail Spanberger. I'm very, very skeptical of that.
Monica?
Yeah, I'm equally skeptical. And it's important to remember that in a year like this, the voters that are going to be motivated to turn out are just way different than the voters that will probably be motivated to turn out in 2026 and 2028. So it's hard to extrapolate what happens in one state, especially one as close to DC as Virginia and is dependent on government jobs, has a lot of people hit by the cuts that Doge made and the Trump administration has continued to make. And it had a sitting Republican governor. And so the motivation was to kind of swing the other way. And that happens a lot in Virginia. So it's not necessarily going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen next year around the country. But I think it does show this year that voters are very mad at the Trump administration and the Republican Party. And they had a weak candidate in the Republican nominee there.
So when you say that we don't know much about this does line up with I would say right now, it looks like the Democrats are going to have a strong midterm, and the results in Virginia do line up with we're probably in a 2018 like environment. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, every midterm is going to swing that way. Whoever's in the White House is probably going to lose some seats in the House. But I think also we just don't know what's going to happen in a year either. And a lot's going to depend on the redistricting that's happening around the country in Republican states and then in Democratic states in response to that. A lot's going to depend on what happens with the Trump administration between now and then. But I think it also just shows you that if the Trump administration continues like it has been, Democratic voters are going to be motivated to turn out. And who they run on the Democratic spectrum is going to be less important than that they run.
So Spanberger, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just I think that there's this sort of big take here, which is just that, Donald Trump won last year because he promised to lower prices. I don't think it's really that much more complicated than that. It was also because his first opponent was 8,000 years old, but it was, mostly the first thing. And he has not kept that promise. And I think the economy will probably be worse when we go into next year. So that's the sort of big umbrella take, and it's not that interesting. I think that the sort of micro take here, though, is that the Democratic base that's going to choose which candidates go up against, Republicans here, I think is going to look quite different from the one in 2018. I think that there's a lot of skepticism about the party establishment and what they're doing. And I think that, the victories of Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger are, I think, unfair or undeservedly going to kind of ease some of the tension there. Democrats can say, look how big we won by choosing these kind of boring candidates. But, I think that the larger story is that this base is still really, really upset with the party leaders.
I was struck on Monday before the election. Spanberger was asked about Mamdani and basically said he's promising unrealistic fairy tale things. it was sort of a weird. It was unusual. She was cruising to victory. I didn't sort of see the point, just rise above it. But it suggests that she does probably. I think she is more leaned into this progressive centrist fight than like Andy Bashir. There are a lot of Democrats who sort of avoid it all. She's going to position herself as a leader of the sort of moderate faction now, right?
I think that's right. And also, I mean, Virginia governors serve 4 terms. It behooves her to position herself as a potential national candidate going down.
4 years, you
Uh,
mean, right? You said 4 terms. You mean 4 years, right?
4 years. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, 1 term, four
one term.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so she's probably leaning into this fight for her own reasons in that way too. But I do think that Democrats are deciding now how to present themselves in 2026, and they feel that they're kind of lost in the wilderness right now, and they need to come up with a new message, a new way of messaging to voters, and that's not entirely wrong, I don't think.
Talk about New Jersey. I think, and Alex wrote this a little bit. I think there was a lot of worry that in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill had really been kind of not just blah, but actually an actively bad candidate. But the margin of victory suggests that she's going to win by double digits. I think Harris won this state by also around 6. So she's going to do better than Harris did. That's not surprising necessarily. But she's overcame what I thought was a bad campaign. The incumbent governor is a Democrat who was not very popular. So, Monica, what'd you make of New Jersey?
It was, less close than I thought it would be. I was prepared for it to be closer for kind of the opposite reason, the opposite dynamics of what are happening in Virginia. They have a current Democratic governor. New Jersey has its own weird politics. New Jersey voters are almost always mad at their current governor for some reason or another, and they want to switch paths. But the fact that it was so decisive for the Democratic candidate, I think does just really show the national mood is anti-Republican and anti-Trump right now for
What do you think,
voters.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was sort of ready to treat New Jersey as a completely singular state here, and it was I wrote an anxious piece after talking to a lot of people in New Jersey last week. That was wrong. I mean, I think that whether or not Mikey Sherrill ran a good campaign, I think is kind of a question that doesn't matter at any point at this point. She won
She
in a
won
state where
numbers.
there was a lot of skepticism about Democratic rule, where the incumbent Phil Murphy had only won by 1.5 points 4 years ago. And she romped to victory. And I think that, the larger story there, is that, there are a lot of ways in which the dynamic right now is like 2018, that if you've got a D next to your name right now, people are going to vote for you. And I think that even with redistricting, is going to make a pretty profound difference next year. At the same time, I think that in some ways, what we're seeing now, especially with kind of everybody succeeding here, I'll talk about New York in a second, but is that, I think that the parties fight over what exactly it is post 2024 is going to get supercharged right now. And I think that Democratic leaders are going to take a sort of a victory lap right now. They're going to try to push various sort of left populist candidates out. They're going to make the case that somebody like Haley Stevens, right, who looks a lot like Mikey Sherrill, right, a kind of milk toast candidate, and who's not particularly inspiring as a public speaker, somebody whose kind of ideological framework is not kind of something that you could easily explain to voters, and certainly not somebody like Zohran Mamdani in New York, or a figure who can kind of go anywhere, right? Like, I think that the anxiety over the loss in 2024 was built partly around the sense that the party didn't have messengers anymore. And I think voters wanted people who could go out and talk. It's one of the reasons why Graham Plattner has been able to hang around despite having a Nazi tattoo. And I think that there was some hope that I think we would have a little bit more clarity about how that tension would get resolved after this. And I think instead, this kind of fight is going to just accelerate now.
Let me zone in on one part of like both in New Jersey and Virginia. It looks like we had a lot of talk about realignment, working class voters are Republicans. I think some of the exit polling, we can debate that itself, does not. It doesn't. New Jersey, we're going to see a realignment. New Jersey will be a place that has large Black population, large Latino population, fairly large working class towns. If someone like Mikey Sherrill, who is kind of generic college graduate Democrat, can win by 13, I'm skeptical that we need to rethink all maybe 2024 was a bit of an outlier. We need to rethink all of political coalitions. But what do you think about that, Monica?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think 2024 was a bit of an outlier for a bunch of reasons. And I think one of the things I see often is that Democrats always overlearn the lessons of the last election and overcorrect and focus group themselves into a weird corner. And they,
But
you
now
know,
it's 60-page reports, to be clear. I don't know if you read it. Now the new thing is, yeah,
yeah. I mean, I'm
with
sure we can
charts.
find as many reports as we wanted to say whatever we want. And I think that the main thing that voters have been, I think the Democratic base wants bolder action from their
Yep.
Democratic candidates. They want more talk about the fundamental unfairness of the American economy. They want more bold ideas about how to change the status quo. They don't want to just say, we're going to undo everything that Trump did and stop there. They want new, fresh ideas and they want a positive message for the future. But I think that that can take a different form in different places. They want people to feel genuine and say what they really believe. And so I think a lot of this hand wringing and stuff should probably pass by the time we're talking about who's running in 2026, because it's just going to depend on where they're running and what they personally believe as candidates. And I think that's one thing that people forget at a time like this.
You're in New York, right, Alex?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So talk about, so it looks like Zoran, just looking at the poll, looking at the results just now, I think Zoran clear appears to be right near and probably going to clear 50%. So that's something that we were looking for. The results are a little bit closer than I thought, though. If only, it looks like Silva's number dropped a lot, and it was like a two-man race. It appears Zoran's going to be about 50 and Cuomo around 42. So what do you make of the polling was mostly like 45, 35, 15. So what do you make of the results?
I think that there was some certainly hope talking to people in the Mamdani orbit earlier today that there would be this kind of decisive mandate that would emerge from this. And what they were looking for was an opportunity to essentially tell people to shut up when they said, like, oh, you didn't do enough. I think, the kind of arbitrary standard for that is clearing 50%. It looks like he's going to probably be around there. That said, I think that Cuomo's performance here was strong enough, particularly in, eroding support from SLUA, which, is sort of an accomplishment when you consider how many Republicans in New York State despise Andrew Cuomo and have despised him for many, many years. I still think that the larger story here is that, a 34-year-old Muslim who was born in Uganda, who no one had heard of a year ago, ran a, just incredible campaign here, inspired people and activated voters who do not vote normally. And I think in a lot of ways, I'll have a piece in our upcoming issue that's about some of this, but he did all the things that people wanted Harrison Biden to do, right? He brought back Latino voters, he brought back Asian voters, he brought back young voters. He was able to kind of go anywhere and talk to anyone. He did it with a very Bernie Sandersy, sort of message discipline. It's very hard to knock him off his game. And I think that, the story here is going to be, well, what happens now? And I think that the party establishment, by keeping him at arm's length for so long, is set him up to fail. And I think the tension there is going to reverberate in a lot of different ways. You saw this with Spanberger's comments earlier. Looking at that race from afar, Spanberger's message was not super different from Zoran's, right? Zoran's promises themselves are really, really small, right? A free bus is not, even a chicken in every pot. It's a free bus. Spanberger also talked about affordability issues, but when it came time to talk about him, she was like, "Oh no, this guy is, beyond the pale. He's totally different." And I think the party establishment is going to have to kind of wake up to the fact that the sort of energy right now is still all around these kind of left populist insurgent candidates. So, they can maybe weather out storms in places like Michigan in these primaries, but it doesn't change the fact that what people are still looking for, we know from this race that it doesn't matter, but what people are still looking for is enthusiasm, dynamism, things that were lacking in 2024. Mamdani had those things. He's going to win, by a smaller margin. The party establishment is going to crow tomorrow, and they're going to be wrong.
Monica, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I would say that was a city-wide mayoral election, and Mamdani had almost the entire Democratic establishment sort of against him, and so he ran anyway. And I thought Democrats were paying more attention to that race, and Republicans were paying more attention to that race than the governor's race in Virginia and the governor's race in New Jersey. And so, I think that the fact that he overcame that despite that opposition, really from everywhere, just showed how excited people were. And like Alex said, he ran a fantastic campaign. It was just really incredibly engaging and it hit a lot of notes that people wanted to hear. So, a lot of his promises were stuff that other cities do, like free buses. That's not a radical idea. A lot of cities have free buses around the world. But, he has a lot of opposition in the state of New York. Some of those things are going to be harder to accomplish. But I think whether voters give him a bit of a pass for trying is something we'll see. They wanted somebody to champion their ideas, and how much he can bring to pass might not be necessarily something that they hold against him as long as he's like earnestly trying and making headway on those things.
I want to zone in on three things, three Democratic leaders over the weekend, or the last 7 days. I think Hillary Clinton was asked somewhere, gave an answer that was asked about Jewish residents' safety and kind of non-answered. Schumer spent the last few days literally declaring he would not say who he voted for, kind of running away in a press conference, won't say who he voted for. Barack Obama did this weird thing where I guess he leaked his staff there was a phone call in the New York Times which Obama said congratulated Mamdani and said he wanted to help him, but there was no public endorsement, and so that was also bizarre. So, what do you make of of those any of those three actions?
I mean, I think that it points to a party that is still living in fear of taking any action that could get put on a mailer. Like, I think it's not even just, the sort of cowardice or lack of principle involved here. It's that it's an outdated way of thinking, that they are convinced that if they can somehow keep or maintain rhetorical distance from Mamdani, that it somehow won't come back to bite them. That's not going to happen, right? Mamdani is going to be a focal point of Republican attacks in the next year. There is going to be a concerted effort, I think, by the Trump administration, but also by forces within this New York City, probably the NYPD. Zoran's actually, I think, walked a pretty fine tightrope with them so far. But I think that people will be looking to see what happens there. But I think in general, what we've seen, is just an establishment that remains terrified of taking any kind of risk. They remain really scared of embracing people with new ideas, and I think that they're always worried about how actions will come back to haunt them in some way. But in this instance, I think what people are seeing, what a lot of the young voters, people of color who turned out here in New York, are seeing a candidate who listened to them, who paid attention to them in the way that Democrats haven't. And I do think that if they throw him to the wolves, which is what I think that they are planning on doing, that will come back to bite them in 2026 too.
So your point essentially is like Mondani is one of the most famous Democrats in the country now. He's part of the team, whether they want it or not. They should help him succeed, and their current posture is basically rooting for him to fail. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the point here I think the general point of this race is that Democrats everywhere are winning, and that Democrats everywhere are activated. And I think that pushing that kind of enthusiasm is the way to win. And it's going to look like Abigail Spanberger probably in more places than it looks like Zoran Mamdani, and it'll look somewhere in between in some other places too. But the party's insistence on kneecapping those people is something that consistently hurts them. It hurt them in 2024, right? I think that the decision by the Harris campaign to kind of modulate its rhetoric on Gaza while still refusing, for instance, to give them even a symbolic, non-televised speaking appearance at the DNC actually really did resonate for a lot of people. I think what people wanted to see, one, was that the Democratic Party had space for them, that they weren't going to be told to shut up about Gaza or trans issues or a $15 minimum wage, whatever it is, that they didn't want to be condescended to in this way. And that Democrats have consistently pushed the same kind of message, right? Which is that the stakes are too important for you to care about that. You need to trust us, right? We're going to sort of moderate to speak to this kind of hypothetical voter, and then we'll win. Well, certainly when I talk to people now, and this is, I think, the core difference between now and 2018, is that people are pissed off and they don't trust the Democrats because the Democrats keep saying, we know how to win, right? We've picked these people, we designed them in a lab to win. They don't win, right? So Graham Plattner, like, he might have a Nazi tattoo, which is crazy and bad, but he can speak to people, right? And I think that what the party hasn't shown is any sense of humility that is interested in actually learning from these people or embracing them, especially in places where they can win.
Monica.
Yeah, I think that's right. It is in the interest of Democrats for Mamdani to be able to deliver on some of his promises because they want to show that the Democratic Party can deliver things that they say that they're going to deliver on. It's important. We haven't talked about Katie Wilson in Seattle, but she's another challenger to the left. We won't find out about her race tonight on the East Coast, but it's important that affordable housing is built in cities where Democratic voters are struggling to be able to pay their rents and can't buy houses. It's important for the Democratic Party to kind of get behind these ideas. And I think that the other, component of it is that whatever happens, no matter who is elected anywhere in the country, the Republican Party is exceptionally skilled at painting the entire party as who they see as their most extreme members. They are good at attacks. They are good at political attacks, and the Democrats are terrified of it. And I think they need to find a way to just say, these are the positive things that we believe that they can deliver for voters without being so scared about that.
Are we talking about one party or two parties? Like, I guess you all are describing a situation in which there's a big party and it's socialist in New York City, but it's moderate in Virginia and it's somewhere between New Jersey and so on. I get the sense there can be a lot of people who are Democrats who are openly rooting against Mamdani or privately for sure. Same thing with Spanberger if you're more progressive. Like when I go on Twitter, I do not see people who seem to be in the same party. I see people who like maybe hate their inter-party rivals more than Trump. Are we describing accurately, is the pro-Israel person in New York hoping Mamdani succeeds? I don't think they are. Is Matt Iglesias hoping Mamdani succeeds? I don't really think he is.
No, I think you might be actively rooting against it, and I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem on the other side too, right? That I think that there's a desire for priors to be confirmed here, and the larger environment kind of right now suggests that everyone's priors are being confirmed, which is, generally speaking, I think a really good sign. I mean, I focus on the sort of other part of it, partly because that's where I am politically, but also just because I think it's more interesting. That said, I think that the party itself remains stuck in a way of thinking that they can kind of model and sort of design their way out of these
The
problems.
popularism, DLCism, moderatism, centrism, that
It's a
thing.
party that's afraid of politics, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that politics is talking to people and it's sort of shifting based on that. And I think that the sort of dream that every Democratic strategist has is that they can win elections without doing any politics at all, right? That somehow you can just sort of adopt the right positions and the voters will fall in line. Well, it doesn't work like that. And I think one of the things on the left that's a real problem is that everybody hates Trump because he's a authoritarian and he's a moron, but he's a damn good politician, right? And he understands that. And I think that one of the things that he understands as a campaigner is that people want you to tell them what you're going to do, right? They want to hear how you're going to materially change their lives. And I think that what you're seeing on the Democratic side right now is still this over willingness to sort of very carefully fine tune policies so that you say, okay, yeah, our new policy, we're going to ban congressional stock trading. Well, yeah, that communicates that you're an anti-corruption party, sure, but like, how's it going to change somebody's life, right? $12 minimum wage, that's great, but the party said 15, 8 years ago, right? What does that say about the party?
Yeah, and they have to connect those two, they have to connect those messages to how that's going to help the voters that are in front of them because they should be talking to them about those ideas. Like you said, that was what Mamdani did. He campaigned. It was like an old-fashioned campaign where he connected to voters and went to their neighborhoods and talked about the issues that they cared about and talked about how his policy ideas would connect to those ideas that they cared about. And I think that you're right, Perry, about the pundit class. Like, this is definitely a conversation that they're having online and in their Substacks. I don't know how much Democratic voters really and truly pay attention to that. I hope it's less than attention than we pay.
Let me close by. So Alex has a piece that just on the website called basically the Democrats are having their Tea Party moment, and it really resonated with me because I've heard a lot of my friends basically saying I used to trust the party's view about electability or what have you, and three things happened. One, they insisted upon Biden running when I thought that was when people thought that was a mistake. They insisted upon sort of anointing Harris in a way that people thought was a mistake. And three, I can see with my eyes that the Gaza policy was a mistake, but they kept doing it anyway. And so, sort of raising these. So I think that. So the point being that the Democratic Party doesn't trust their leaders anymore. And I think that's pretty obvious. I think the other point I want to get is that I think Alex, you're saying is the Democratic leaders themselves don't know that they're distrusted. Is that part of what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, part of the reason I wanted to write this piece is that I just think that Jeffries and Schumer are in really, really big trouble as they head into re-election years in 2026 and 2020. Schumer's up in 28.
Yeah.
But, I think that there's a larger sense within the party that the people that are running it don't know what they're doing. And I think that sense is really well deserved. Now, one of the other lessons I think from today is that you can kind of run anybody with a D next to their name right now, and they're going to do pretty good. But I think what you're seeing is that the party establishment is not taking that as a sort of expansive idea. They're taking that as a restrictive idea. And I think that voters are responding to something different right now. Again, it's just different than it was in 2018 when the candidates that the sort of voters largely coalesced were very pragmatic. They were people that looked like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger. They were kind of national security aligned. And I think the party's starting to look elsewhere. And, I think one of the lessons for me of Mamdani's victory is that Trump in 2016 understood that the media environment had changed fundamentally and that you could kind of reach, entirely new groups of voters with different types of messages, and you could, you just have to go where they are. And, there are Democrats that are starting to understand that. Graham Plattner, I still think he should probably drop out. But he is one of those Democrats. And, I think that the party establishment actually, still favors these candidates that go and meet the press. They don't say anything substantively, because if you say anything substantively, then somebody's going to disagree with you. And that's where the energy is now. I think one of the takeaways from today is that maybe you don't see the same kind of groundswell you saw in the base in 2010 and 2014 in particular. But I think that there is a lot of anger in the base right now that is directed at the leaders.
Do you agree with that, Monica?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that what voters don't want to hear anymore is that things take time in Congress, that, that our institutions have to be protected because they've already been wrecked. Trump could do a lot of things really quickly by being a bad president. He could do a lot of bad things really quickly. Why can't we do good things more quickly? And I think that that's what you're going to see a lot of Democratic voters, and especially the base, really demanding is, we don't want to hear about why things take time. We don't want to hear about bipartisanship. We don't want to hear about the coalitions you're building in DC. We want you to do things, and we want you to do them quickly. And I think that's a different environment.
I agree with what Alex said generally, but it's hard to look at a night in which the blah candidates won one by 12, won by 13. Is it possible that if JD Vance or Trump let's say JD Vance or somebody like him is I can see the appeal of our candidate says nothing interesting. Trump destroys the country. JD Vance says I agree with everything Trump did. That's a safer strategy and one than we're going to run a socialist or someone with a Nazi tattoo. You can see how they arrive at their position, and my sense is tonight is going to sort of reinforce that. Haley Stevens will never say anything interesting, so she's the best candidate in Michigan. Janet Mills have never said anything interesting. She's the best. You can see how they can arrive there, and I worry. I think you started, Alex. Tonight is going to reinforce it, right?
I think absolutely. I think that there is a general reminder of the value of safety, and that is true in a lot of cases. But I think what you're also seeing here is that you want to find energy, right? In Virginia, I think Abigail Spanberger did a pretty good job of that, and I think that the party is shifting its messaging. I think in general,
She was
the
more
larger
anti-Trump than she used to be. She used to be very much I'm bipartisan. Look how she actually was
yeah.
pretty anti-Trump. That's true. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's a campaign that challenged my own expectations about how she was going to run, and I think probably pointed to the way that a lot of kind of establishment friendly Dems are going to run. However, I think that the larger message here is still one in which the party, is living in fear of new ideas and new types of candidates, and I think the voter base is not like that at all. And I think again, what they're not contending with is the rise of independent media outlets, particularly things like Midas Touch and like the ability for people to reach voters directly. And so I think that, the overall thesis here that if you run a kind of Haley Stevens type everywhere, then you can kind of sit back and just, watch the success roll in. I'm not so sure that that's right. I think that what you want to see is a party that is showing dynamism, right? And I think that, Schumer and
I think you're
Jeffries
saying
have.
something different. I think you're saying, let me interrupt. You're saying that person may not win the primary anyway, right? Even if they agree that they want to have the most boring candidate possible, it appears as if the people in Maine are going to give Plattner, like, I thought Plattner was going to be out. And it looks like the people, and these people showing me his events are like creating a primary where I thought one would end. And I think that's what it's not just, I think that it may be bad for the general election. The primary voter may no longer take these kinds of candidates, right?
Yeah. I think that it's not necessarily the question of whether someone is more electable than somebody else. Like I am agnostic on that point. Like I
Yes.
don't know. I mean, I have candidates that I like more, but I think that Democratic figures are one, overstating their ability to select people based on electability criteria that they've just made up. But two, that I think they're frankly overestimating their ability to control the environmental
This is
crisis,
what I
and
think.
that's what you're
Yes.
seeing in Michigan. And I think that what's going to play out over the next year is going to be very, very interesting. And that, I think that Mills may very well prevail in Maine, right? But that race is starting earlier than a lot of others. And I think you're going to see these things pop up. The other thing, which I think is very interesting, is to look at Hakeem Jeffries here in New York. And that I think Jeffries is going to face a sort of DSA backed challenger probably in the next week or two. And that race, how that race gets nationalized is going to be very interesting, but how that race affects others will too, because suddenly, there will be the question of if you think Chuck Schumer should remain, speaker, if you're in a Senate race, is a very interesting one. And I'm very
I
interested to
think
see
Janet
how.
Mills wouldn't even commit to that. She kind of non-answer because she knows where the numbers are. Monica, talk about like, I mean, do Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer care if they're popular or not? I mean, I guess they care if they lose their seats, but does it matter if they're popular otherwise?
I mean, it matters if they're popular in their districts. That's probably the only thing that matters to them.
Yeah.
They want an effective caucus. They want to be able to control their caucus and get what they want done in Washington. But I do think that, there's kind of a difference between winning in 2026 and in 2028, which, in 2026, anybody with a D next to their name could probably win.
Mhm.
Depending on what happens in the next 4 years and who's running on the Republican ticket, there's a lot of going to be anti-Trump sentiment still around, if Trump wrecks the economy, then anybody with a D next to their name might be able to win. But there's a different question about actually building and using power effectively. And so, in 2020, electability was the main worry that Democrats had, and they chose Joe Biden. And that wasn't a candidate who could last. He only could serve 4 years. Nobody wanted to support him again in 2024. Ultimately, he was kicked out of the race for a bunch of different reasons. And so, do you want to just win in 26 and 28, or do you want to win in a way that helps you build power for the future, that helps you build a new majority, that helps you actually truly reverse a lot of the things that Trump did, and also really tackle inequality and make things better for your voters and change the course of a lot of the things that have been going bad for a long time for a lot of voters in a way that will have an impact on their lives. And so I think that if you just want to win one race, you might not have to think about these questions a lot. But if you do want to win kind of a lasting chance at really having the presidency for a while, really having the House and the Senate, then you do need to think about what your base wants, what the Democratic coalition you want to build wants, and what voters want to see you actually accomplish once you get there.
So we didn't learn much from tonight, in part because it appeared to be anybody with a D on their name won, so you can't really take much. Is that the sort of subtext here?
I never
Yeah.
thought that you were going to be able to take a huge lesson
Okay,
from
fair enough.
tonight. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it buys everybody time to figure out what they're going to do, right? I think that that's the big lesson right now, and Democrats have, already had a lot of time, and they haven't done anything with it, frankly. But I think what you have here is sort of broad outlines of a party that can work to take on Trump. You've got Mamdani and the kind of more, activist left wing policy laboratory way. I think Mamdani's connection to the kind of abundance framework is something that's often been misunderstood. But he's very much an abundance sort of YIMBY style, good government, cut red tape style Democrat. And then on the other end, you've got Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, who are, more less rhetorically interesting, but I think generally aligned with the party's overall image of itself as a kind of um, good government. We won't sort of bug you too much. There's too much chaos out there. We're just going to sit down and get stuff done. And I think that in terms of messaging, you see it everywhere, right? It's people hate this administration and they hate its policies and they want anyone who will stand up to it. And they also think that everything's way too expensive right now. And I think that that message itself is probably enough to carry them through the midterms. Just briefly in the last point, though, what I think that they still have forgotten is just the lesson of Barack Obama, but the lesson of Trump too, which is that voters belong to parties because they identify with them. They identify with people in them, and they have a sense that those people understand what they're going for, and perform that in some way. And I think that what is more concerning to me about the way that Spanberger and Sherrill have been embraced by the party and Mamdani has not, is that it suggests that Democrats still don't understand that they still think that the party's future is by showcasing, a kind of version of politics that has no politics, that people just kind of, put their heads down. They don't distract you. You can just go about your life and watch, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City or whatever. And I think that the party needs to get more comfortable with dynamic figures that challenge the assumptions about what the electorate wants, because those figures keep speaking to the electorate right now. And you need to have both. And what we're going to see, I think, are a lot of people that are going to say you need to have one or the other.
Okay. I think that was a great place to close on. Thanks you guys for joining me. Thanks for everybody that tuned in. And we'll be back in a few days. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.